Pete Johnson had been a loyal employee at a local manufacturing plant for over a decade. He was known for his strong work ethic and dependability, but on this particular Friday night, after pulling a grueling 16-hour shift, Pete's life took a dramatic turn. Exhausted, Pete drove home on the quiet, dimly lit roads of his small town. His eyelids were heavy, and his head nodded briefly, which caused his car to slightly swerve within his lane. This caught the attention of a police officer parked on the shoulder. Moments later, red and blue lights flashed behind him. Pete pulled over, unsure of what he'd done wrong. The officer approached with suspicion. "Sir, have you been drinking tonight?" Pete, startled but cooperative, replied, "No, officer. I just got off a long shift at work." The officer wasn't convinced. After administering a field sobriety test, which Pete struggled with due to sheer exhaustion, he was arrested on suspicion of DUI. Despite Pete's protests and requests for a breathalyzer, he was taken to the county jail. It wasn't until hours later that blood tests revealed Pete had zero alcohol or drugs in his system. But by then, the damage was already done. He bonded out and was given a court date. Collateral damage. Pete's arrest made local news, and by Monday morning his employer had already heard about it. When Pete failed to call in during his time in jail, the company invoked its strict no-call, no-show policy and terminated him without hesitation. Pete tried to explain the situation to HR, but the stigma of being arrested, despite no conviction, sealed his fate. Pete's wife, Melissa, was initially supportive, standing by his side and vowing to help him through the ordeal. She knew Pete didn't drink, didn't do drugs, and wasn't even on medication. But as the court process dragged on for over a year, the financial strain became unbearable. With Pete unable to find steady work and the legal fees piling up, Melissa's patience wore thin. 6 months into the trial, she filed for divorce, leaving Pete even more devastated, a flicker of hope. By the time Pete was finally found innocent a year later, his life was in ruins. His savings were depleted, his reputation tarnished, and his marriage over. Pete moved in with an old friend and took a job at a local diner, doing what he could to make ends meet. One evening, Pete received a surprising call from a lawyer named Brian Carter. "Pete," Brian began, "I've been following your case. I believe you have grounds to sue the state for wrongful arrest and even your former employer for wrongful termination." Pete sighed. "That sounds great, Brian, but I can't afford a lawyer." Brian chuckled. "I'm not asking for money. I'll take your case for free, but on one condition. This has to be public. The state has been doing this to countless people, and your story could inspire others to come forward." Pete hesitated, but eventually agreed. They arranged to meet the next day at the diner where Pete worked, a life-altering decision. During their meeting, Pete laid everything on the table. He expressed doubts about pursuing such a high-profile case, but Brian assured him it was the right move. Just as they were wrapping up, Pete's phone buzzed. It was Melissa. "I've been thinking," she said. "I made a mistake filing for divorce. I want to work things out." Pete was stunned. For a moment, hope flickered. He told Brian about the call, expecting the lawyer to celebrate the news. Instead, Brian leaned in, his tone serious. "Pete, listen to me. She left you when you needed her most. Don't let her back in now that things might turn around. Finalize the divorce. Trust me, it's the smart move." Reluctantly, Pete followed Brian's advice and signed the divorce papers. It hurt, but deep down he knew Brian was right. Justice served. Once the divorce was finalized, Brian got to work. He filed lawsuits against both the state and Pete's former employer. The cases garnered significant media attention, and Brian used the platform to expose a pattern of wrongful DUI arrests. After months of legal battles, Pete won both cases. The state was ordered to pay a hefty settlement for wrongful arrest, and his former employer faced consequences for their premature termination. Pete's financial struggles were over, and because of the divorce, he didn't have to split the winnings with his ex-wife. Brian, meanwhile, became a prominent figure in the legal world, using Pete's case as the cornerstone of a law firm specializing in false DUI cases. His firm helped countless other victims seek justice. A new chapter. With his life back on track, Pete moved into a new apartment and started fresh. He never returned to the manufacturing plant, but instead used his settlement money to open a small auto repair shop, something he'd always dreamed of. The experience had scarred him, but it also taught him resilience. As he hung the open sign on his new business, Pete smiled for the first time in years. The chapter of his life marked by false accusations and heartbreak was finally closed. The state of Tennessee has to do better,